That's right, Yvonne. The death toll has been climbing rapidly over the last day and a half, now over 5,000. What began yesterday morning in the early hours in Türkiye of a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, and initial reports of only dozens of casualties has now risen to a catastrophic level of damage, and that death toll appears to only continue to climb. Authorities fear that it will continue like this and that the peak hasn't been reached yet of this disaster. As you mentioned, the World Health Organization, the WHO, is fearful that the full picture, the total number of people killed, could well and truly eclipse another massive earthquake disaster in 1999 here in Türkiye, which killed 17,000 people in the Istanbul area. But rescue workers are certainly struggling against difficult conditions in the south of this country and over the border in Syria to try and change that. These are crucial hours, Yvonne. This is the second day. It's been 2 nights and 2 days of continued rescue efforts. It's been a really hard slog for a lot of those rescue workers. It's freezing cold. It's snowing. You can probably see a few snowflakes around me. Here it's really tough and it's slow going. Airports and major highways are closed. Flights into the quake zone have been either delayed or cancelled. So getting the help they need has been a little bit tough. But even for the survivors, the people who could still be rescued, they face another set of challenges of their own. These are people who might still be buried under the rubble and who have dealt now with 2 freezing nights, hoping and praying that they'll be found.
Indeed, Tom, just watching those apartment blocks crumble, it's really hard to imagine anyone could have survived that, but yet there have been some amazing tales of survival. What else have you been hearing?
Well, that's right. We heard just a little earlier as well, one of those examples. We've seen really emotional video coming out of the quake zone. Some of those rescue workers pulling young children who've been buried under chunks of concrete and twisted metal for a long time, for more than a day, who are still alive. It's truly incredible, and those rescue workers have been just overcome with relief. We have no idea how many people remain trapped in the rubble, as I say, but so far thousands of people have been rescued, so there is a glimmer of hope. This is a really crucial time in these early days following the initial disaster, so there's still hope yet, although that window is closing.
Are aftershocks still being felt, or what has been the impact of some of these after the quake on Monday morning?
Most definitely, Yvonne. Those aftershocks in some cases have been deadly. That initial 7.8 magnitude earthquake around 4 a.m. Türkiye time on Monday, around 35 hours ago, was just the start. There's been a series of deadly aftershocks since then. And on top of that, there have been subsequent earthquakes as well, one yesterday afternoon and also one this morning which rated around 5.6 magnitude. So these all pose dangers to rescue workers who are already, as I say, facing difficult wintry conditions. The aftershocks and subsequent earthquakes have also collapsed more buildings as well. So not only was it the initial quake yesterday, but also the rescue efforts are hampered by continued risk as well.
And Tom, how many people roughly have been displaced, and are many of them fleeing the disaster zone?
Yvonne, there's no way of knowing at this point in time how many people have been pushed from their homes. We know that from the beginning of this, from yesterday morning, that authorities had been urging people in partially collapsed buildings or in apartment blocks in areas that have been affected to evacuate. A lot of people have fled to find shelter. It's been pelting rain and snow, so that's hard to come by. People have been sheltering in cars. They've been huddling around makeshift fires in streets. Some have left entirely the region, but we won't ever know, well, for the moment, how many people that is. But it's difficult circumstances. People have been rendered effectively homeless. If they've survived, they now have a different set of challenges to deal with, which is the reality of their home utterly destroyed. Entire apartment blocks of several 7 to 10 stories just crushed in a matter of seconds. They now have the challenge of finding somewhere safe for their family.
Is it dangerous to be in areas already damaged by the quake for fear of more buildings collapsing?
Absolutely, Yvonne. This is an ongoing, unfolding ordeal. And as I say, the authorities fear that we haven't even come close to the peak of this disaster yet. So without a doubt, there is a risk to both the rescuers and survivors to come. In Syria, of course, it's a different picture entirely. It's a country that's been through more than 11 years of civil war and bombardment by regime forces there, and fighting with opposition and rebel groups as well. So particularly in areas affected by this quake, people might have already had their buildings bombarded by aircraft already, and this quake has just added a second disaster on top of that. We're also talking in Syria about many people who might have already fled their homes before because of the civil war. So displaced people, millions of them across that part of the country, vulnerable already from the fighting, now facing this second disaster.
And lastly, Tom, how have authorities responded to the crisis, and how much are they relying on international support?
Well, the Turkish government has been quick to say that their response has been swift and effective. We heard that from the President Recep Tayyip Erdogan yesterday. But certainly as this disaster has unfolded, as more and more, there have been more and more casualties, as the death toll has rapidly climbed, it's clear that there will be an enormous need for the international support that started to pour in from around the world. Dozens and dozens of countries have offered it. Some have even already mobilised rescue teams or provided humanitarian products and aid, or specially trained dogs to help find survivors, or mapping equipment. So as this continues to develop, that international help will be critical. The question is, how quickly can it arrive, and how quickly can it be made effective? We've seen flights cancelled and delayed for help coming in from around the rest of Türkiye, but some of those international teams should be arriving now, if not already, then in the next coming hours and days. And without a doubt, there'll be a reliance on that. Another question that remains unanswered is to the extent to which the Turkish government might have been prepared for a disaster of this scale. I mentioned earlier that tragic disaster in 1999 of the earthquake in the Istanbul area, which killed at least 17,000 people. This area that Türkiye is on sits astride a number of fault lines, which makes it a hotbed of this sort of earthquake activity. It's not unusual. There have been many in recent history. So there will be questions raised once time has passed enough for investigations to begin around how prepared Türkiye was, its government was, to deal with a disaster of this scale.
Tom Joyner, thank you so much for updating us.